Imagine you are trapped in a freezing, muddy forest. You have no food, you have no water. You are completely out of bullets, and you are surrounded on all four sides by an enemy that really wants you dead. And then, suddenly, you hear the whistle of artillery coming from the sky. You think you are finally being rescued until the shells start landing directly on your head, and you realize with absolute horror that the people blowing you to pieces aren't the enemy. It is your own army. You have roughly 500 starving guys evaporating under friendly fire, and your only way to tell headquarters to stop killing you is a single, cross-eyed, one-legged bird that currently refuses to get off a tree branch. I am not making that up. In October 1918, during the bloodiest, most chaotic final weeks of World War I, 194 American soldiers were saved from a literal friendly fire meat grinder by a pigeon named Cher. And this wasn't just your average park bird. This was an angry, bitey, feathered super soldier who got shot in the chest, blinded in one eye, had his leg blown completely off, and still managed to outperform the entire United States Army Signal Corps. How does a bird with half its body parts intact become the most valuable military asset in American history? Well, to understand that, we first have to look at just how epically, historically bad humans are at communicating. Let me set the scene for you. It is October 1918, during the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, which is basically the Allied powers throwing everything they have at the German line to end the war. Major Charles Whittlesey is commanding elements of the US 77th Division. A bunch of tough, blue-collar guys from New York, and they get orders to push deep into the dense, foggy Argonne forest. Whittlesey pushes his men forward exactly like he was told. But there's just one tiny problem. The French and American units on his left and right flanks ran into heavy resistance and retreated. Nobody bothered to give Whittlesey that memo. So his battalion wakes up one morning to find themselves cut off, 3/4 of a mile ahead of the rest of the Allied army, completely surrounded by German troops. They become known to history as the Lost Battalion. And it is a miserable existence. They are digging little holes in the mud for shelter. They are drinking brown water out of puddles that definitely have dead things floating in them. The Germans even send over a polite note demanding that they surrender. Now, popular legend says that Major Whittlesey read the surrender note and yelled, "Go to hell," at the Germans. Though Whittlesey himself later admitted he didn't actually say anything that cool. Regardless, they didn't surrender. They stayed put and braced for the worst. But on October 4th, the worst actually came from behind them. Back in American Division headquarters, an artillery commander decides he is going to support Whittlesey's trapped men by dropping a massive barrage of high explosive shells onto the surrounding German lines. It sounds like a great plan on paper. The only issue is that the commander's map coordinates are completely, catastrophically wrong. Instead of hitting the Germans, he starts dropping heavy artillery directly onto Whittlesey's men. It is the ultimate, terrifying military version of stop hitting yourself, except people are losing limbs. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they just call headquarters and tell them to stop? Why didn't they send an email or use a radio or literally anything besides a bird? You have to remember that 1918 communications technology was a complete dumpster fire. Field radios back then were the size of refrigerators, ran on car batteries, and worked about as well as a dial-up modem inside a tunnel. Telephone lines had to be physically dragged across the dirt by hand, and German artillery shells had already chopped Whittlesey's telephone wires into metal confetti. Human runners, actual brave guys sprinting through the trees with handwritten notes, were getting sniped by German machine gunners before they could even clear the clearing. Which brings us to the homing pigeon. Now, I know it sounds ridiculous to trust the survival of 500 American soldiers to the exact same animal that eats cigarette butts outside a subway station, but carrier pigeons aren't street rats. They are biological GPS units with feathers. In fact, while Europeans were still trying to figure out if bathing caused ghosts, empires from the Tang dynasty in China to the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad were running complex, continent-spanning postal networks on homing pigeons for 1,000 years. These birds fly at speeds up to 60 miles an hour, and they have an unfair biological cheat code called magnetoreception. Translation: they have tiny magnetic sensors built into their heads that let them read the Earth's magnetic field like an invisible compass. You can put one of these birds in a pitch-black box, spin it around 10 times, drive it 100 miles away into unfamiliar territory, release it, and it will beat you home every single time. During World War I, military pigeons had a 95% success rate. That is literally more reliable than my home Wi-Fi. So, as friendly artillery shells are raining down on their heads, Whittlesey's men start releasing their pigeons to call off the strike. First bird goes up, boom, shot out of the sky by a German sniper. Second bird goes up, boom, taken down instantly. The Germans know exactly what those birds are doing, and they are skeet shooting the battalion's only lifeline. Soon, Whittlesey is down to his very last bird, a black check homing pigeon donated by the British, bearing the French name Cher, which translates to dear friend. Now, despite the sweet name, surviving soldiers later described Cher as kind of a jerk. He was a hangry diva who bit his handlers, had a bad attitude, and only worked well when he was bribed with snacks. And right now, he wasn't getting snacks. He was getting friendly fire. Whittlesey or his aide grabs a tiny scrap of onion skin paper to write the most important message of their lives. You would think a trained military commander would write something formal, maybe use some proper protocol or grid references. Instead, the guy was so panicked, he actually misspelled the word parallel and wrote what sounds like an angry, desperate text message to a roommate who won't stop blasting heavy metal at 3 in the morning. The exact historical note, typo and all, read: "We are along the road parallel 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." They roll up the little scrap of paper, slide it into the tiny aluminum canister on Cher Ami's left leg, take a deep breath, and toss him into the air. And this is where Cher Ami achieves absolute legend status. Because with 500 men screaming below him, high explosives shattering the trees, the ground shaking, and the fate of the entire battalion riding on his tiny wings, Cher Ami flies about 20 feet, lands on the branch of a nearby oak tree, and starts casually preening his feathers. He literally took a smoke break. I am not kidding. The ultimate war hero's first reaction to a suicide mission was, "Nah, I'm good." Down below, the soldiers are losing their absolute minds. You have grown men dodging shrapnel, throwing rocks at this bird, screaming at the top of their lungs, and waving their tin helmets like maniacs, just trying to get this pigeon to do his job. Finally, one frantic soldier has to physically climb the tree and shake the branch until Cher Ami gets annoyed enough to actually take off. But the second he clears the tree line, the Germans spot him. Every rifle, every machine gun in the valley points up at the sky and opens fire. Soldiers recalled that the gunfire was so thick it sounded like buzzing bees. It was a solid wall of lead, and right away, Cher Ami gets hit. A rifle bullet rips straight through his breastbone. Shrapnel blinds him in one eye, and another round catches him in the leg, the exact left leg carrying the aluminum message canister. The leg is completely shattered, hanging off his body by a single thin tendon. The bird flips upside down and plummets toward the ground. The American soldiers watch him fall, and their hearts collectively drop into their stomachs. That was it. That was their last hope. They were going to die in that mud. But then, right before he hits the dirt, this one-eyed, bleeding, half-dead bird catches an updraft, spreads his wings, and starts climbing. Any sane animal on Earth would have laid down in the grass and waited for the end. Not Cher Ami. He flies 25 miles through heavy fog, artillery smoke, and active combat in roughly 25 minutes. That is a mile a minute, while literally bleeding out and dragging a piece of his own leg through the air like luggage. Back at division headquarters, the pigeon loft handler hears the arrival buzzer go off. He runs over to the trapdoor and finds Cher Ami lying on the floor of the coop, covered in blood, one eye swollen shut, gasping for air. And dangling from the torn ligament of his ruined leg is the little metal tube. The handler strips off the canister, rushes the note to the commanding officer, and the room erupts. Within minutes, the artillery command gets the order, and the friendly barrage stops cold. A few days later, Allied reinforcements finally break through the German line. 194 battered, starving American soldiers walk out of the Argonne forest alive. They were saved because a bird decided it simply refused to die that day. Now, you would think that after saving nearly 200 human lives, the army would let the guy retire to a nice park with unlimited breadcrumbs and a pension. But the story gets even weirder. Army surgeons worked frantically to save Cher Ami's life. They stitched up his chest, cleaned his eye, and because his leg couldn't be saved, I swear this is true, a soldier carved him a tiny wooden peg leg out of a scrap of wood. They gave a bird a pirate leg. He became a national celebrity overnight. The French government awarded him the Croix de Guerre with a palm leaf, which is one of their highest military honors. Just try to mentally picture a French general solemnly pinning a literal war medal onto a bird that looks like a miniature maritime pirate. But here is my absolute favorite detail about this entire saga. For over 100 years, every official U.S. Army Signal Corps report, every news article, and every historical tribute referred to Cher Ami as a she. Everyone just assumed this badass bird was a female hen. It wasn't until the year 2021, over a century later, that scientists at the Smithsonian Institution ran DNA tests on Cher Ami's preserved body and made a shocking discovery. Cher Ami was a male. The United States military casually misgendered their greatest animal war hero for 100 uninterrupted years because nobody bothered to check his plumbing. And if that isn't enough drama for you, in the 1920s, a rival pigeon owner actually tried to pull off bird identity theft by claiming his own bird was the real Cher Ami to cash in on the fame, until the military had to check aluminum serial numbers on leg bands to prove who the real one-legged pirate was. Today, you can still see Cher Ami, wooden leg and all, preserved at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., staring out at visitors with his one good eye, reminding us that sometimes the most complex military problems can only be solved by the simplest, most stubborn creatures on Earth. But speaking of WWI animals that completely outclass their human handlers, if you think a peg-legged pigeon is wild, wait until you hear about the stray Boston Terrier who got promoted to sergeant, learned how to salute officers, and personally tackled a German spy in the trenches. Trust me, you won't want to miss that one. What is your favorite animal hero story from history? Let me know in the comments below.